Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be left for dead on a dusty road in the middle of nowhere? Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, framed for a crime you did not commit, and hunted like an animal? This is the story of Penelope James, a woman who lost everything in a single night. Her reputation, her freedom, nearly her life. But this is also a story about second chances, about a stranger who chose to help when he could have looked the other way, about justice that comes to those who fight for it, and about love that grows in the most unexpected places. Remember this: no matter how broken you feel, no matter who left you behind, your story is not over until you decide it is. Penelope was left for dead, but she chose to rise. And so can you. If you believe that good people deserve happy endings, stay with me until the end. Because Penelope's journey from that blood-soaked trail to the life she built afterward will remind you that no matter how dark things get, the sun always rises again. Now let me take you back to a hot August day in 1873, to a lonely stretch of road outside Weaverville, California, to a woman lying face down in the dirt, wondering if each breath would be her last. The California sun beat down without mercy on the dusty trail that wound through the hills outside Weaverville. It was the kind of heat that made men seek shade and animals find water. The kind of heat that could kill a person left exposed for too long. Penelope James had been lying on that trail for hours. Her white dress, once clean and proper, was now torn and stained with dirt and blood. Her honey-blonde hair had come loose from its pins and lay matted against her face, sticky with dried blood from a wound on her forehead. Every breath sent sharp pain through her ribs, and she had stopped trying to move a long time ago. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind playing tricks on her. Sometimes she thought she heard voices. Sometimes she thought she saw shadows moving at the edge of her vision. But when she managed to open her eyes, there was nothing but empty road and scrubland stretching in every direction. They had left her here to die. Reed Tucker and his men. They had beaten her until she could barely stand, then dumped her on this forgotten road like garbage. They assumed the heat in the wilderness would finish what they had started. Penelope had tried to crawl toward the shade of some distant rocks, but the pain in her ribs made movement nearly impossible. After a few feet, she had collapsed and could go no further. Now she lay still, conserving what little strength remained. Her throat was so dry she could barely swallow. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that this was the end. She thought about her mother, who had passed away 3 years earlier. She thought about the little apartment she had rented in Sacramento with its view of the street below. She thought about all the things she had wanted to do with her life, all the places she had wanted to see. None of that would happen now. A fly landed on her cheek, and she lacked the energy to brush it away. The sun continued its slow arc across the sky, indifferent to her suffering. Then she heard something, a sound that cut through the haze of pain and dehydration. Hoofbeats. At first, Penelope thought she was imagining it, another trick of her dying mind. But the sound grew louder, more distinct, the rhythmic thud of a horse approaching at a steady pace. Fear gripped her heart. What if it was Tucker's men coming back to make sure she was dead? What if they had changed their minds about leaving her to the elements? She tried to make herself smaller, pressing her body against the dirt as if she could somehow disappear into the ground. But she was too weak to do anything more than lie there and wait. The hoofbeats stopped nearby. She heard the creak of leather as someone dismounted. Then footsteps coming closer. A shadow fell across her face, blocking the brutal sun. "Good Lord," a man's voice said. The words were soft, tinged with genuine concern. Penelope felt hands on her shoulder, gentle despite their obvious strength. She was turned onto her back, and she found herself looking up at a face silhouetted against the bright sky. Broad shoulders, a cowboy hat casting shadows across his features, the outline of a man who looked like he spent his days working the land. "Madam, can you hear me?" he asked. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a weak croak. Her throat felt like sandpaper. The man moved quickly. She heard the slosh of water in a canteen, then felt blessed coolness as he dampened a bandana and pressed it to her cracked lips. "Easy now," he said. "Just a little at first." A few drops of water trickled into her mouth, and Penelope had never tasted anything so wonderful in her entire life. She tried to grab for the canteen, desperate for more, but her arms would not cooperate. The stranger seemed to understand. He lifted her head slightly and let her take small sips, patient despite the obvious urgency of her condition. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "Who did this?" Penelope's vision was clearing slightly, enough to make out more details of her rescuer's face. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair and a strong jaw covered in a few days' worth of stubble. His eyes were brown, serious, and concerned as they examined her injuries. She tried to answer his question, but the words would not come. All she could manage was a single whispered word. "Please." The stranger nodded, understanding her desperation even without knowing the details. "I have got a ranch about 5 miles from here," he said. "My housekeeper can tend to your wounds." "Can you sit up?" Penelope tried, but the pain in her ribs made her cry out. The stranger winced in sympathy. "All right," he said. "I am going to lift you. Try to stay as still as possible." His arms slid beneath her shoulders and knees, and he lifted her with surprising gentleness. Even so, the movement sent waves of agony through her body. She whimpered, and tears leaked from her swollen eyes. "I know it hurts," the stranger said. "Just hold on. I will get you someplace safe." He carried her to his horse, a chestnut mare that waited patiently nearby. With some difficulty, he managed to set her atop the saddle, then mounted behind her. One arm wrapped securely around her waist while the other held the reins. "Lean back against me," he instructed. "Try not to move too much." Penelope had no choice but to trust this stranger. She had nothing left, no strength, no options, no hope except for this man who had appeared out of nowhere to help her. She let her body go limp against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her back. The horse began to move, each step sending small jolts of pain through her battered body. As they rode, consciousness faded in and out. Sometimes she was aware of the landscape passing by, the scrubby hills and scattered trees of the California frontier. Sometimes she slipped into dark dreams where shadows chased her, and rough hands grabbed at her arms. Each time she startled awake, the stranger's arm tightened slightly around her waist, a silent reassurance that she was not alone. "You are safe now," he murmured at one point as if reading her fears. "No one is going to hurt you here." Penelope wanted to believe him, but she knew the truth. She was not safe. She would never be safe again. Not as long as Reed Tucker was alive and free. Tucker had killed his own partner and framed her for the murder. He had taken the money and the gun and arranged everything to make her look guilty. The wanted posters were probably already spreading across the territory, offering rewards for her capture. And here she was, helpless and dependent on the kindness of a stranger whose name she did not even know. The irony was not lost on her. 6 months ago, she had been a respectable bank teller in Sacramento. She had a steady job, a clean reputation, and plans for a modest but comfortable future. Now she was a fugitive, beaten within an inch of her life, with nothing to her name except the torn dress on her back. How had everything gone so wrong so quickly? The answer was simple. She had tried to do the right thing. She had discovered that her employer was stealing from innocent people, and she had refused to look the other way. That single act of integrity had cost her everything. The horse slowed, and Penelope forced her eyes open. Through blurred vision, she saw buildings coming into view. A 2-story farmhouse, a large barn, several smaller structures scattered across a well-maintained property. "We are here," the stranger said. "Pine Creek Ranch." He dismounted carefully, then reached up to lift her down. His movements were gentle, but still the pain made her gasp. "Mrs. Finch?" he called toward the house. "Mrs. Finch?" Come quickly." A door opened and a stout woman in her 50s appeared. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her face was kind, despite its initial shock at the scene before her. "Merciful heavens," she exclaimed, rushing forward. "What happened to this poor child?" "Found her beaten on the trail to town," the stranger explained. "She needs tending to, and quick." The woman took charge immediately, directing the man to carry Penelope inside and up the stairs to a spare bedroom. The room was simple but clean, with an iron-framed bed covered by a colorful patchwork quilt. As the stranger laid her down on the soft mattress, Penelope caught his eye. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. The words felt inadequate for what he had done, but they were all she had to offer. He nodded, his expression serious but kind. "You just rest now, miss. You are safe here." And despite everything, despite the pain and the fear and the knowledge that her troubles were far from over, Penelope believed him. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to close her eyes without worrying about what might happen when they opened again. She was alive. Against all odds, she was alive, and somehow that had to count for something. The next several days passed in a haze of pain, sleep, and slowly returning strength. Penelope learned that her rescuer's name was Xavier Hayes, and that he had owned Pine Creek Ranch for 4 years. He was a quiet man who kept mostly to himself, preferring the company of his horses and cattle to the bustle of town life. Mrs. Finch, his housekeeper, had been with him since he first arrived in California, and ran his household with efficient maternal care. Mrs. Finch turned out to be an excellent nurse. She cleaned Penelope's wounds with gentle hands, wrapped her cracked ribs tightly with strips of cloth, and made sure she ate broth and bread even when she had no appetite. The older woman asked no questions about what had happened, seeming to understand that some stories needed time before they could be told. "3 ribs cracked by my reckoning," Mrs. Finch reported to Xavier on the second evening. "That eye was swollen shut, but it is improving now. She is covered in bruises from head to toe. Some defensive wounds on her hands, too. She fought back hard against whoever did this." Xavier's jaw tightened at the information. Penelope could see the anger in his eyes, though his voice remained calm. "Will she be all right?" "With time and rest, I believe so," Mrs. Finch replied. "She is young and strong. The body heals if given the chance." Xavier nodded, glancing toward the closed bedroom door where Penelope lay resting. "Did she say anything? Her name? Or who did this?" Mrs. Finch shook her head. "Only fragments. Nothing that makes much sense. She mentioned a man named Silas once and something about a lockbox. But mostly, she just sleeps." Xavier was quiet for a moment. "I will sit with her tonight. You get some rest, Mrs. Finch." The housekeeper frowned. "That would not be proper, Mr. Hayes. A single man in a young woman's bedroom." "I will sit in the chair by the door," he assured her, "just to be on hand if she wakes frightened or needs anything." Reluctantly, Mrs. Finch agreed. And so Xavier spent that night in an uncomfortable wooden chair, dozing lightly and waking at every sound from the bed. Near dawn, Penelope began to thrash, caught in the grip of a nightmare. "No, please," she cried out. "I do not have it. Stop! Please stop!" Xavier moved to her bedside, hesitating for just a moment before gently touching her shoulder. "Miss, you are safe now. No one is going to hurt you here." Her eyes flew open, wild with fear. For a moment, she seemed not to recognize him, her body tensing as if preparing to flee. Then gradually her gaze focused on his face, and recognition flickered in her eyes. "Water," she whispered. Xavier helped her sit up slightly, supporting her back as she sipped from the glass he held to her lips. The simple kindness of the gesture, so different from what she had experienced at the hands of Tucker's men, brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she managed, when she had drunk her fill. Her voice was stronger than it had been on the trail, though still rough from disuse. "You are welcome." Xavier set the glass aside. "Can you tell me your name?" She hesitated. Telling him her name meant admitting who she was. If he had seen the wanted posters, if he knew she was accused of murder and theft, he might turn her over to the authorities. Or worse, he might be tempted by the reward money. But she looked into his steady brown eyes and saw no greed there, no suspicion, only genuine concern for her well-being. "Penelope," she said finally. "Penelope James. Miss James." He nodded slowly. "Do you remember what happened to you? Who did this?" Pain shadowed her eyes, and not just the physical kind. "I cannot say. I should not involve anyone else in my troubles. You have been kind, but once I am able, I should go." Xavier frowned. "You are welcome to stay as long as needed. Whatever trouble you are in, perhaps I can help." "No." She shook her head, then winced at the pain the movement caused. "They are dangerous men. They will kill anyone who interferes." "They?" Xavier raised an eyebrow. "So there is more than one person after you?" Penelope realized she had revealed more than she intended. "Please, Mr. Hayes, the less you know, the safer you will be." Xavier considered pressing further, but recognized the fear in her voice. It was the fear of someone who had witnessed terrible things and expected more terrible things to come. He had seen that fear before, in the eyes of soldiers during the war, and in the faces of settlers whose homesteads had been raided. "All right," he said gently. "But you are staying put until you are healed. I will not have you wandering off to get yourself killed after I went to the trouble of finding you." A ghost of a smile touched Penelope's lips. "You are stubborn, Mr. Hayes." "So I have been told." He allowed himself a slight grin. "Rest now. Mrs. Finch will bring you some broth when you wake." Over the next several days, a rhythm established itself at Pine Creek Ranch. Penelope slept much of the time, her body working to repair the damage it had suffered. When awake, she accepted Mrs. Finch's motherly care and Xavier's occasional visits with increasing comfort. He would come by in the afternoons, usually after finishing his work with the cattle. Sometimes he brought her books from his modest library. Sometimes he simply sat with her on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the mountains while they talked about nothing in particular. Penelope learned that Xavier had come to California from Missouri after the war. He had used his military pay and a small inheritance from his father to buy the ranch, building it up from nothing over 4 years of hard work. He had few friends in town and no family to speak of. "It is quiet out here," he admitted one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Some folks would call it lonely, but I have always preferred my own company." "No wife?" Penelope asked, then immediately felt her cheeks flush at the boldness of the question. Xavier shook his head. "Never found the right woman, I suppose. Or maybe I just never looked very hard." He glanced at her. "What about you? Family waiting for you somewhere?" "My mother passed 3 years ago," Penelope said softly. "Father died when I was young. No brothers or sisters. I have been on my own for a while now. That is a hard way to live." She shrugged, then winced as the movement pulled at her healing ribs. "You get used to it. Though I suppose that is true of most hard things. You get used to them whether you want to or not." Xavier nodded slowly, seeming to understand her meaning. There was something about him that invited confidence, a steadiness that made Penelope feel like she could tell him anything, and he would simply listen without judgment. But she held back. The truth of her situation was too dangerous to share, too likely to drag him into a mess that was not his to solve. She had already put him at risk simply by being here. She would not make it worse by telling him everything. On the 4th day, Xavier brought her a book of poetry by Tennyson. "Thought you might be getting bored," he explained, setting it on her bedside table. "Not much for reading myself, but my mother loved this one." "That is very thoughtful of you," Penelope said, genuinely touched by the gesture. She reached for the book, and her fingers accidentally brushed against his hand. The contact was brief, lasting only a moment, but something passed between them. A spark of connection that surprised them both. Xavier cleared his throat and pulled away. "I will be riding into town tomorrow. Is there anything you need?" She hesitated, You have done far too much already, Mr. Hayes. Nonsense. And call me Xavier, please. Mr. Hayes makes me feel like my father. Penelope smiled, the expression transforming her face despite the fading bruises that still marked her features. Xavier, then. And I am Penelope. Penelope, he repeated as if testing the way the name felt on his tongue. It suits you. He left then, and Penelope found herself staring at the door long after he had closed it behind him. There was something about this quiet rancher that stirred feelings she had not expected to feel. Not here, not now, not when her life was in shambles and danger lurked around every corner. But the heart does not always follow logic. And despite everything, she could not deny the warmth that spread through her chest whenever Xavier walked into the room. It was foolish, she told herself. Reckless and foolish. She was a wanted woman, accused of murder and theft. She had no business developing feelings for the man who had rescued her. But try as she might, she could not make herself stop. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered if Xavier felt the same way. The next morning, Xavier rode into Weaverville to attend to business. Supplies at the general store, mail at the post office, a quick visit to the bank, routine errands that he had completed dozens of times before. But this time, something caught his eye as he was leaving the bank. A poster tacked to the community notice board, a crude drawing of a woman with familiar features. His blood ran cold as he read the words printed below the image. Wanted for theft and murder. Penelope James. Reward offered for information or capture. The drawing was poor, but there was no mistaking the resemblance. The same honey blonde hair. The same delicate features, the same determined set of the jaw. Xavier stared at the poster for a long moment, his mind racing. The woman recovering in his home was accused of stealing $5,000 and murdering a man named Silas Blackwell in Sacramento. The date on the poster was just 1 week prior. He tore the notice from the board, folding it carefully and tucking it into his pocket. Then he turned his horse toward home, questions burning in his mind and a decision forming in his heart. He would have the truth from Penelope James, one way or another. The ride back to Pine Creek Ranch felt longer than usual, though Xavier pushed his horse harder than he normally would. His mind kept returning to the wanted poster in his pocket, to the words theft and murder printed in bold black letters. He did not want to believe it. Everything in him resisted the idea that Penelope, the frightened woman he had found beaten and left for dead, could be a killer. Her eyes held fear, yes, but not the cold calculation of someone capable of murder. Her manner was gentle, her gratitude genuine. But he had been wrong about people before. The war had taught him that even the most innocent-seeming face could hide darkness underneath. When he arrived at the ranch, he found Penelope sitting on the front porch, wrapped in a quilt, despite the warm afternoon sun. Mrs. Finch had helped her arrange her hair, and some color had returned to her cheeks. She looked almost healthy, almost normal, almost like a woman who had not been through hell and back. "You are looking better," Xavier observed as he dismounted and tied his horse to the porch rail. "Fresh air helps," she replied with a small smile. "Mrs. Finch thought I should start rebuilding my strength." Xavier nodded, his expression carefully neutral. He pulled the wanted poster from his pocket, unfolded it, and held it up so she could see. "Care to explain this?" The color drained from Penelope's face so quickly that Xavier thought she might faint. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair, knuckles turning white. For a moment she looked like she might bolt, despite her injuries. "Where did you get that?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Town notice board," Xavier answered, sitting in the chair beside her. "Now I am inclined to believe there is more to this story, considering the state I found you in. But I need the truth, Penelope. All of it." She was silent for a long moment, staring at her hands. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and Xavier could see the internal battle playing out on her face. Fear warred with something else. Desperation, perhaps. Or maybe hope that he would listen and understand. Finally, she looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "I did not kill Silas Blackwell," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "But I am accused of it, and of stealing money that was already stolen." "Start at the beginning," Xavier urged gently. She took a deep breath and began. "I was a teller at Blackwell's Bank in Sacramento. I worked there for 2 years, and I was good at my job. The customers liked me, and Mr. Blackwell always said I had a head for numbers." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "6 months ago, I noticed something wrong. Discrepancies in certain accounts. Money moving in ways that did not make sense. And you investigated." Penelope nodded. "I should have kept my head down. I should have pretended not to see. But those accounts belong to ordinary people, farmers, shopkeepers, widows trying to stretch their husbands' savings. I could not just watch their money disappear without knowing why." "What did you find?" Silas was embezzling. He and his partner, a man named Reed Tucker, had been stealing from the depositors for years. Small amounts at first, then larger ones as they got bolder. They had taken thousands of dollars from people who trusted them. Xavier leaned back in his chair, processing this information. "And you confronted Blackwell about it?" "Foolishly, yes." Penelope's voice turned bitter. "I thought he would make it right if exposed. I thought he would return the money and beg forgiveness. Instead, he threatened me. He said no one would believe a woman over a respected banker, and that his associates would ensure I never spoke of it again. But you did not back down." "No." She lifted her chin, a flash of the spirit that had impressed Xavier showing through her fear. "I could not just watch him steal from people who trusted him. So I gathered evidence, ledgers, notes, letters between him and Tucker, everything I needed to prove what they were doing. What happened then?" Penelope closed her eyes, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "Last week, Silas caught me copying ledger entries. There was a struggle. He attacked me, tried to—" She shuddered, "but I managed to escape with some of the evidence. I was planning to take it to the federal marshal the next morning. But you never made it. I returned to my boarding house to find it ransacked. While I was hiding in the alley, 2 men arrived. Silas and Reed Tucker. They were searching for the documents." She opened her eyes, and Xavier saw the horror of the memory reflected in them. When they could not find what they wanted, Silas became enraged. He and Tucker argued, and then Tucker shot him. Xavier straightened in his chair. "Tucker killed his own partner?" "Right there in my room." Penelope's voice hardened. "Then he saw me hiding. He said I was the perfect solution to his problems. With me blamed for the murder and the missing money, no one would look any further. Tucker took everything. The embezzled funds Silas had been carrying, the gun. He arranged the scene to make it look like I had done it. And then they brought you out here, Tucker and 3 of his men. They drove me at gunpoint for 2 days, far from Sacramento, far from anyone who might help." She swallowed hard. "They were going to kill me where no one would find the body. But they argued about whether to use me first. During the argument, I managed to break free. One of them caught me, beat me badly, but I fought back. Something distracted them, a noise in the distance, and they left me for dead rather than finishing the job. That is when I found you." "Yes." She met his gaze squarely. "That is the truth, Xavier. All of it." He was quiet for a long moment, turning her story over in his mind. It explained everything: her injuries, her fear, her reluctance to involve anyone else, and it fit with what he had observed of her character over the past week. "The evidence you collected," he said finally. "The documents that could clear your name. Where are they?" "Hidden." Penelope allowed herself a small smile. "Somewhere they could not find. These men, Tucker and his associates, they will be looking for you. Yes. And they are connected to powerful people, wealthy men with influence." She looked away. "I have put you in danger just by being here. I should leave as soon as I am able to travel." Xavier shook his head firmly. "You are not going anywhere." "Not yet." Surprise flickered across her face. "You believe me?" He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping gently around hers. "I am a decent judge of character, Penelope. I have been since the war taught me to read men's faces and know who could be trusted in a fight. You are no murderer, Relief washed over her features, and for a moment she looked like she might cry. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for believing me." The moment stretched between them, a connection forming that neither had anticipated. Xavier was acutely aware of the warmth of her hand in his, of the gratitude shining in her eyes. Finally, he cleared his throat and gently pulled away. "You should rest. We can talk more tomorrow about what to do next." "What to do next?" Penelope frowned. "There is nothing to do. I cannot prove my innocence without the evidence, and I cannot get the evidence without going back to Sacramento. And if I go back there, Tucker will find me. Then we will figure out how to get the evidence and avoid Tucker at the same time." Xavier stood, decision made. "You will stay here until you are fully recovered. Then we will make a plan to clear your name." "We? You think I am going to let you face this alone?" He looked at her with something that might have been affection. "You landed in my path, Penelope James. Like it or not, that makes you my concern now." She stared at him for a long moment, seeming to search his face for some sign of deception or ulterior motive. Finding none, she slowly nodded. "You are a good man, Xavier Hayes." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I am just a rancher who found a woman in trouble. Anyone would do the same." "No." Penelope shook her head. "They would not. Most people would have ridden on by. Most people would have turned me in for the reward after seeing that poster. You are different." Xavier had no response to that. So he simply tipped his hat and walked toward the barn, leaving Penelope alone on the porch with her thoughts. But as he tended to his horse, his mind was already working on the problem. Tucker was dangerous, well-connected, and motivated to keep Penelope silent permanently. Getting the evidence from Sacramento would be risky. Getting it without being caught would be nearly impossible. But Xavier had faced impossible odds before. During the war, he had led his unit out of situations that should have killed them all. He had survived ambushes and sieges and desperate last stands. This was different, of course. This was not war. But the stakes felt just as high. He thought about Penelope sitting on his porch, bruised but unbroken. He thought about the strength it must have taken for her to stand up against powerful men who could have destroyed her with a word. He thought about the way she had fought back against her attackers, even when escape seemed impossible. She was worth fighting for. He knew that as surely as he knew his own name, and one way or another, he was going to help her win. 1 week after Xavier found the wanted poster, Penelope's strength had returned enough for travel. Her ribs still ached when she moved too quickly, and bruises still marked her skin in shades of yellow and green. But she could walk without assistance, and her mind was sharp and focused on the task ahead. They had spent the week planning, going over every detail of what needed to happen in Sacramento. The evidence Penelope had hidden was their only hope of clearing her name, and retrieving it would require careful timing and more than a little luck. "I need to return to Sacramento," Penelope said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "The evidence I hid is the only way to prove my innocence." Xavier frowned. "You are not fully healed yet." "Healed enough," she countered, "and every day I stay here puts you at greater risk. Tucker will not stop looking for me, and eventually someone in town will remember seeing you with a woman who matches the description on those posters." "You planning to just walk into Sacramento with a price on your head?" he challenged. "I have a friend there, a woman I trust. She can help me retrieve the documents without anyone knowing I am in the city." Xavier was quiet for a moment, his jaw set in a way that Penelope was beginning to recognize. It meant he had made up his mind about something and would not be moved. "When were you thinking of leaving?" he asked finally. "Tomorrow, if possible. I could take the stage from Weaverville, alone." He shook his head firmly. "Not happening, Penelope. If you are determined to go, I am coming with you." "No." She started to protest, but he raised a hand to stop her. "This is not negotiable. You need someone watching your back, and I am offering, unless you have got some objection to my company." "Your ranch." Penelope said weakly. You cannot just leave. Liam can manage things for a week. Xavier referred to his ranch hand, a reliable young man who had been with him for 2 years. Mrs. Finch will keep him in line. She studied his face, seeing the determination there and knowing that arguing would be pointless. But she had to try one more time. Why would you risk yourself for me? You barely know me. Xavier considered the question seriously, his brown eyes thoughtful. Maybe because I spent 4 years out here keeping to myself, not getting involved in other people's problems. And then you quite literally landed in my path. He smiled slightly. Or maybe I just have a strong dislike for men who beat women and leave them for dead. The real answer, the one that had been growing in his heart for days, remained unspoken. But Penelope seemed to sense it anyway. Something shifted in her expression, a softening that made his chest tighten. It will be dangerous, she warned. Most worthwhile things are, he replied simply. The following morning they set out for Weaverville to catch the afternoon stage. Xavier had explained their absence to Mrs. Finch and Liam as a necessary business trip to Sacramento, without elaborating on the nature of that business. The housekeeper had looked skeptical but had held her tongue. In town, Xavier purchased tickets while Penelope waited at a small cafe, a shawl draped over her head to obscure her features. Her heart raced every time the door opened, but their luck held. No one seemed to recognize her. The stage journey took 2 days, with an overnight stop at a roadhouse in Redding. Neither of them slept much, too aware of the danger they were heading toward and too uncertain of what they would find when they arrived. On the second day, as the stage rattled along the dusty road toward Sacramento, Xavier noticed Penelope's tension increasing with each mile. She sat close to him, her shoulder touching his, her eyes constantly scanning their fellow passengers. Try to relax, he murmured. You look nervous, which draws attention. She nodded, making a visible effort to loosen her rigid posture. I have not been around people since it happened. Every face looks like a threat. I know. He placed his hand over hers, a gesture that was becoming natural between them. But you are not alone now. She turned to look at him, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement of the connection that had been building since the moment he found her on that dusty road. Neither spoke of it directly, but both felt it growing stronger with each passing hour. By the time they reached Sacramento that evening, the sun was setting, and both of them were exhausted but alert. The city was larger than Weaverville, bustling with people and activity even at this late hour. We should find rooms for the night, Xavier suggested as they stepped off the stage. Your friend can wait until morning. Penelope shook her head. Clara works nights at the hospital. This is the best time to find her, and I do not want to risk staying at a hotel where I might be recognized. They hired a carriage to take them to Sacramento General Hospital. Penelope asked the driver to wait, then approached the entrance with Xavier close behind her. Inside, she inquired about Clara Bennett, identifying herself only as a cousin visiting from out of town. After a few minutes of waiting, a slender woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner appeared from a back corridor. The moment Clara saw Penelope, her face went pale with shock. But to her credit, she recovered quickly, her professional composure snapping into place. This way, she said briskly, leading them down a hallway to a small room used by the hospital staff for breaks. Once the door was closed behind them, she embraced Penelope tightly. My God, Penny. Everyone thinks you are either dead or on the run. I nearly was dead, Penelope replied grimly. She quickly introduced Xavier and explained their situation, keeping her voice low despite the privacy of the room. Clara listened intently, her expression growing darker with each detail. When Penelope finished, the nurse shook her head slowly. I knew something was wrong when they claimed you killed Silas. You could not hurt a fly. She glanced at Xavier. And you have been protecting her all this time. Just lending a hand, he replied modestly. Clara assessed him with a nurse's perceptive eye, then nodded approvingly. Well, she is lucky you found her. She turned back to Penelope. What do you need from me? A place to stay tonight, and help retrieving something I hid. My apartment is small, but you are both welcome, Clara offered. As for the hiding place, where is it? Penelope hesitated, then leaned closer. The cathedral, in the third confessional. Xavier raised an eyebrow. You hid stolen bank records in a church? Not stolen, Penelope corrected. Copied. And it seemed the safest place at the time. No one would think to look there, and I knew the priest's schedule. I tucked the documents behind a loose panel in the wooden frame. They should still be there. The cathedral opens at dawn for morning mass, Clara said. We can go then, when there are plenty of other worshippers around to provide cover. That night they stayed in Clara's small apartment. Xavier insisted on sleeping on the floor, giving the two women the bed. None of them slept well, too keyed up with anticipation and worry about what the morning would bring. Before dawn, they set out for the cathedral. The streets were quiet, occupied only by early workers making their way to jobs in the warehouses and factories. The massive doors of Sacramento Cathedral were already open, warm light spilling onto the stone steps. Inside, a handful of parishioners knelt in the pews for morning prayers. The smell of incense hung in the air, and candles flickered in alcoves along the walls. It was peaceful and serene, a stark contrast to the danger that Penelope knew lurked somewhere in the city. She led Xavier and Clara toward the row of confessional booths along the side wall. As they approached, her steps faltered. What is it? Xavier whispered, noticing her hesitation. There is someone in there. She nodded toward a man just exiting the middle confessional. Xavier's hand moved instinctively to the gun concealed beneath his coat. Do you recognize him? Penelope squinted, then relaxed slightly. No, just a worshipper, I think. They waited until the man had left the cathedral. Then Penelope slipped into the third confessional booth. Her heart pounded as she knelt in the small space, feeling along the wooden panel at knee level. Her fingers found the loose section and pried it open. She reached into the dark space behind it. Her face fell. It is gone. Xavier crowded into the small space beside her, running his own fingers along the empty hiding spot. Are you sure this is the right place? Positive. Panic edged into her voice. Someone found it. A shadow fell across the confessional entrance, and a cold voice cut through the silence. Looking for this, Miss James? They turned to find a man in his 50s standing there, dressed in the dark suit of a banker. He held a leather portfolio in one hand. Two younger men flanked him, their stances making clear they were not there to pray. Tucker. Penelope's voice was barely a whisper. Reed Tucker smiled, and the expression held no warmth at all. You are more resilient than I gave you credit for, he said. My associates assured me you would not survive your lesson on that roadside. Clearly, I need better help. Xavier moved immediately, positioning himself between Penelope and the three men blocking the confessional entrance. His hand rested on the grip of his revolver, though he had not yet drawn it. You must be the Good Samaritan, Tucker observed, his cold eyes taking in Xavier's defensive stance. The cowboy who took in a stray. Unfortunate for you. And you must be the snake who beats women and frames them for murder, Xavier replied evenly. I have been wanting to meet you. Tucker's smile widened, though it never reached his eyes. How touching, a genuine frontier hero. Tell me, do you know what she is accused of? Murder, theft, conspiracy. You have been harboring a wanted criminal. I have been protecting an innocent woman from a killer, Xavier corrected. And looking at you now, I can see I was right. From behind Xavier, Penelope found her voice. How did you find the documents? Tucker held up the leather portfolio, tapping it with his free hand. You think I would not watch the places meaningful to you? I had men observing this cathedral for days after your disappearance. Eventually, one of them noticed the loose panel during a confession. He chuckled. Imagine my surprise at finding such detailed evidence of poor Silas's misdeeds. And my own. There are copies, Penelope bluffed, stepping forward to stand beside Xavier. I sent them to the federal marshal before I fled the city. A valiant attempt, my dear. But if that were true, I would be in custody already. Tucker's expression hardened. No. I think this portfolio contains the only evidence of my involvement. And once you are silenced permanently, there will be no one left to contradict the official story. He gestured to his men. Now, I think we should take this conversation somewhere more private. The three of you will come with us quietly, or my associates will create a scene that ends badly for everyone. Xavier's hand tightened on his gun. The church was not empty. Other worshippers were scattered throughout the pews, some beginning to notice the tense confrontation near the confessionals. If shooting started, innocent people could be hurt. But he was not about to walk meekly into Tucker's trap, either. Before he could decide on a course of action, Clara's voice rang out from behind Tucker. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" Tucker turned, momentarily distracted by the unexpected interruption. Clara stood in the aisle, her nurse's uniform lending her an air of authority. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were alert and sharp. In that instant of distraction, Xavier acted. He lunged forward, grabbing the leather portfolio from Tucker's hand with one swift motion. At the same time, he shoved Penelope toward Clara. "Run!" Tucker stumbled back into his men, cursing. Xavier drew his revolver and fired a single shot into the ceiling, the sound deafening in the enclosed space of the cathedral. Chaos erupted. Screams echoed off the stone walls as worshippers scrambled for cover, diving beneath pews and rushing toward the exits. Tucker's men reached for their weapons, but the sudden panic created confusion and blocked their lines of fire. Xavier backed toward the side exit, keeping his gun trained on Tucker. "Go!" he shouted to Penelope and Clara. "I am right behind you." The two women ran, Penelope's healing ribs protesting with every stride. Clara grabbed her hand and pulled her through a side door into a narrow corridor. One of Tucker's men fired, the bullet splintering the wooden frame of a confessional inches from Xavier's head. Xavier returned fire, catching the man in the shoulder and spinning him to the ground. The second guard hesitated for a crucial moment, and Xavier used that hesitation to make his escape. He burst through the side door, portfolio clutched tightly under his arm, and found Penelope and Clara waiting in the alley outside. "Move," he urged, grabbing Penelope's hand. "They are right behind us." They ran through the narrow passages between buildings, avoiding the main streets where they might be easily spotted. Behind them, shouts and gunfire echoed from the cathedral as Tucker's men gave chase. "The sheriff's office," Penelope gasped as they ran. "It is our only chance." "Too far," Clara countered. "And the sheriff is in Tucker's pocket. Half the city council is." "Then where?" "The newspaper." Clara pulled them around a corner, pressing against the wall as two men ran past without seeing them. "My cousin James works at the Sacramento Gazette. He is honest, and he hates corruption. If we can get the story out, Tucker will not be able to silence us all." They changed direction, weaving through back streets toward the newspaper office. Penelope's breath came in ragged gasps, her ribs screaming with every step, but she forced herself to keep moving. They had come too far to fail now. The Sacramento Gazette occupied a narrow building squeezed between a dry goods store and a law office. Clara burst through the front door, startling the few reporters present at that early hour. "James!" she called. "James, come quickly!" A wiry man with ink-stained fingers emerged from a back room. His spectacles were pushed up on his forehead, and his shirt sleeves were rolled past his elbows. "Clara? What in blazes?" "No time to explain." Clara pushed Penelope and Xavier ahead of her into the building. "These people need protection and a platform. It is about the Blackwell murder." James's expression sharpened, journalistic instincts overriding surprise. "The bank murder? You know something about it?" Xavier thrust the portfolio forward. "We know everything about it, and we have proof that the real killer is Reed Tucker, who is currently trying to silence us permanently." James took the portfolio, flipping through the documents inside. His eyes widened as he scanned the pages. "Good Lord," he murmured. "Names, dates, amounts. This is incredible." "It proves Tucker and Blackwell were embezzling together," Penelope explained quickly. "When I discovered it, Blackwell tried to silence me. Tucker killed him to take over the operation and framed me for the murder." Outside, shouts became audible. James moved to the window and peered through the glass. "We have company," he announced. "Tucker and at least 4 men." They are heading this way. Is there a back door? Xavier asked. James nodded. Through the press room. But they will have the alley covered in minutes. Then we need to move now. Clara grabbed Penelope's arm. The telegraph office. Bill Watkins runs it. He is honest. We can wire the federal marshal in San Francisco and get the story out at the same time. James was already moving toward the back of the building, portfolio in hand. I will set the presses running. Even if Tucker gets to us, the story will print tomorrow morning. Go. Get to Watkins. They slipped out the back door just as Tucker's men entered through the front. The alley was narrow and dim, smelling of ink and garbage. Clara led the way, navigating the maze of passages with the confidence of someone who had grown up in this city. 3 blocks, she whispered. Just 3 more blocks. They moved as quickly as stealth allowed, pressing into doorways and shadows whenever footsteps approached. Twice they barely avoided Tucker's men, who were spreading through the area in a methodical search pattern. Finally, the telegraph office came into view, a small building with a sign proclaiming Western Union Telegraph in faded letters. Almost there, Clara breathed. And then Tucker stepped out of a side alley, revolver raised and aimed directly at Penelope's heart. That is far enough. Xavier moved to draw his gun, but Tucker shook his head. I would not, Cowboy. My men have you surrounded. One wrong move and you all die right here in the street. Xavier's jaw tightened, but he lowered his hand. Tucker was not bluffing. Men were emerging from doorways and alleys, forming a loose circle around them. At least 5 guns pointed their direction. The portfolio, Tucker demanded. Where is it? Gone, Penelope said, lifting her chin defiantly. On its way to the presses. Tomorrow morning, every person in Sacramento will know what you did. Something flickered in Tucker's eyes. Fear, quickly masked. You are bluffing. Am I? The Gazette has the documents right now. Even if you kill us, the story comes out. For a long moment, no one moved. Tucker's expression shifted as he calculated his options. Then the door of the telegraph office opened and a voice called out, What is going on out here? Bill Watkins stood in the doorway, his round face creased with concern. Tucker's men tensed, but the telegraph operator was clearly unarmed and posed no threat. Tucker, Clara said loudly, her voice carrying in the early morning quiet. Reed Tucker, who killed Silas Blackwell and framed this innocent woman for the crime. We have evidence, and it is already at the newspaper. More people were appearing now, drawn by the commotion. Shopkeepers opening their doors. Workers pausing on their way to jobs. A small crowd gathering at a safe distance, watching the confrontation unfold. Tucker's face flushed with anger. Shoot them, he ordered his men. Shoot them all. But the men hesitated. Killing fugitives in a dark alley was one thing. Murdering people in broad daylight with witnesses watching was another entirely. I said, shoot them. A new voice cut through the tension, authoritative and commanding. Tucker, this is Sheriff Dawson. Stand down and disperse immediately. The crowd parted to reveal the sheriff and 4 deputies, all armed and advancing toward Tucker's position. Dawson's face was grim, his eyes fixed on the banker. For a moment, everything balanced on a knife's edge. Then, slowly, Tucker lowered his gun. Sheriff Dawson kept his revolver trained on Tucker as his deputies moved to disarm the banker's men. The crowd of witnesses had grown larger, and several people were already murmuring about what they had seen and heard. Sheriff, Tucker said smoothly, attempting to regain control of the situation. I am pursuing a wanted fugitive. This woman is accused of murder and theft. So I have heard, Dawson replied. Convenient how the only witness to Blackwell's embezzlement ended up accused of killing him. He held up a paper that Xavier had not noticed him carrying. Just got an interesting telegram from Judge Harmon. Seems he received some very concerning financial records this morning that implicate you in fraud, Tucker. The judge thought I should know before anyone else got hurt. Xavier turned to Penelope in confusion, but she looked equally surprised. Then realization dawned. James, she breathed. He must have sent copies to the judge before setting the presses. The newspaper man had outplayed Tucker at his own game. While Tucker was chasing them through the streets, James Bennett had been sending the evidence to the one person in Sacramento with enough power and integrity to act on it. "This is absurd," Tucker sputtered. "You cannot possibly believe the ravings of a wanted criminal over a respected businessman." "I believe what I see," Sheriff Dawson said. "I see a woman who is beaten half to death and left on a roadside. I see armed men cornering unarmed citizens in the street. And I see documents that link you to embezzlement and conspiracy." He gestured to his deputies. "Take him and his men into custody." For a tense moment, it seemed Tucker might resist. His hand twitched toward his gun, and his men looked to him for direction. But the deputies had the advantage of numbers and position, and the crowd of witnesses made any violent action suicidal. Slowly, reluctantly, Tucker allowed himself to be disarmed and restrained. His men followed suit, their faces showing a mix of fear and resignation. As the deputies led them away, Sheriff Dawson approached Xavier and Penelope. "Miss James," he said, his tone considerably warmer than it had been a moment before, "I believe I owe you an apology. When those wanted posters arrived, I took them at face value. I should have dug deeper." "You believed what you were told," Penelope replied. Tucker went to great lengths to make his story convincing. "Even so," Dawson shook his head, "Judge Harmon wants to speak with you as soon as possible. He has read the documents and believes your innocence can be established. Until then, you are under his protection." The next 24 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Judge Harmon, a stern but fair man in his 60s, reviewed the evidence personally. Federal marshals arrived from San Francisco on the evening train. Tucker and his associates were held without bail. And one by one, the full scope of their crimes came to light. The evidence Penelope had gathered was more comprehensive than even she had realized. The documents included not just records of embezzlement, but correspondence between Tucker and Blackwell discussing their schemes. They revealed that Tucker had been the mastermind all along, manipulating his partner and planning to take over the operation eventually. When Blackwell became a liability, Tucker eliminated him. Framing Penelope had been an afterthought, a convenient way to deflect suspicion and eliminate a witness at the same time. "You were remarkably thorough," Judge Harmon told Penelope during their meeting the following afternoon. "Most people in your position would have been too frightened to document anything. Your attention to detail may have saved your life." "I had to be certain," Penelope replied. "I knew no one would believe a woman's word against a respected banker without irrefutable proof." The judge nodded approvingly. "Well, you have that proof. The federal marshals have enough to charge Tucker with murder, fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder. He will spend the rest of his life in prison, assuming he is not hanged." Standing beside Penelope, Xavier felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The danger was over. Tucker could no longer threaten her. "There is one more matter," Judge Harmon continued. "The bank's board of directors has been in contact with me. They are eager to avoid a public lawsuit and have authorized a settlement of $5,000 as restitution for your ordeal." He smiled slightly. "Ironically, the same amount you were accused of stealing. They have also extended an offer to return to your position at the bank, should you wish it." Penelope blinked in surprise. "That is very generous. It is the least they can do," the judge said bluntly. "Their negligence allowed Tucker and Blackwell to operate for years. They should be grateful you are not pursuing them in court." When they left the judge's chambers, Xavier took Penelope's hand as they walked down the courthouse steps. The afternoon sun bathed Sacramento in golden light, and for the first time since they had arrived, the city felt welcoming rather than threatening. $5,000, Xavier said. "That is enough to start over anywhere you want." Penelope stopped walking, turning to face him. "Is that what you want? For me to start over somewhere?" His grip on her hand tightened. "What I want," he said slowly, "is for you to be happy and safe, whatever that looks like." She searched his face, her eyes soft. "And if what makes me happy is a quiet life on a ranch in the hills above Weaverville?" Xavier's heart stuttered in his chest. "Is that what you want?" "These past weeks," she said quietly, "despite the danger, despite everything, I have felt more alive than I have in years, and I think you have something to do with that." Penelope, let me finish. She squeezed his hand. When I was lying on that roadside, certain I was going to die, I made myself a promise. I promised that if I survived, I would not waste time on hesitation or fear. I would live fully, love boldly, and never again let important words go unspoken. She took a breath, steadying herself. I have come to care for you, Xavier Hayes, more than I can properly express. More than might be wise given how short a time we have known each other. But I have learned that wisdom is not always the same as truth, and the truth is that you have become important to me. Xavier was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly a smile spread across his face. You know, he said, I have never been much good with words, always preferred to let actions speak. But I suppose there are some things that need saying out loud. He drew her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. I think I started falling for you the moment you opened your eyes on that dusty road and asked me for water, he admitted. Every day since then has only made it worse. Or better, depending on how you look at it. So what do we do about it? Well, he said thoughtfully, I have a ranch that could use a woman's touch, and you have a settlement that could help expand operations. Seems like there might be an arrangement that benefits us both. Penelope laughed, the sound bright and free. Xavier Hayes, are you proposing a business partnership? Among other things, he replied, grinning. Though I was hoping the partnership might include something a bit more permanent eventually. If you are interested, she answered by rising onto her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was brief but full of promise, and when she pulled away, they were both smiling. I think that can be arranged, she said. They spent one more day in Sacramento, tying up loose ends and saying goodbye to Clara. The nurse embraced Penelope tightly, tears in her eyes. You write to me, Clara instructed, every month. I want to know everything that happens. I promise, Penelope assured her, and you must come visit. The ranch is beautiful this time of year. Clara glanced at Xavier, who was loading their bags into a hired carriage. He is a good man, she said quietly. Hold on to him. I intend to. The journey back to Weaverville was different from the trip out. Instead of tension and fear, there was anticipation and hope. Xavier and Penelope talked for hours, sharing stories from their pasts and making plans for their future. The settlement money would allow them to expand the herd and improve the ranch buildings. Penelope's experience with banking would help manage the finances, and together they would build something lasting on the California frontier. When Pine Creek Ranch finally came into view, Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. It feels like coming home, she said softly, though I have never been here before, not properly. Xavier pulled the carriage to a stop and turned to look at her. It is home, he said simply, if you want it to be. She reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. I do. Mrs. Finch was waiting on the porch when they arrived, her face a mixture of curiosity and concern. But when she saw the way Xavier looked at Penelope, her expression transformed into a knowing smile. About time you brought someone home, Mr. Hayes, she said approvingly. This place has been too quiet for too long. Penelope smiled at the housekeeper. I hope you do not mind the intrusion, Mrs. Finch. Mind? The older woman snorted. I have been praying for this day since I started working here 4 years ago. She bustled forward to help with the bags. Now come inside, both of you. You must be exhausted, and dinner is almost ready. As they walked through the front door, Xavier's hand warm in hers, Penelope allowed herself to truly believe that the nightmare was over. Tucker was in custody. Her name was cleared, and a new chapter of her life was beginning. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in months, she was eager to find out. 6 months had passed since Penelope James arrived at Pine Creek Ranch, and in that time, everything had changed. The wedding had taken place on a crisp October morning with Mrs. Finch, Liam, Clara, and Judge Harmon as witnesses. The ceremony was simple, held on the ranch property beneath a spreading oak tree that Xavier's mother had planted years before. Penelope wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Finch had helped her sew, and Xavier looked handsomely uncomfortable in a suit that was clearly saved for special occasions. Their vows were brief but heartfelt. Penelope promised to stand beside Xavier through whatever challenges the frontier might bring. Xavier promised to love and protect her for the rest of his days. When they kissed to seal the marriage, Mrs. Finch dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "About time," she muttered, though she was smiling broadly. The settlement money from the bank had proven to be a wise investment. Xavier used half to purchase additional cattle and improve the ranch's irrigation system. The other half went toward expanding the main house, adding a second bedroom and enlarging the kitchen to Mrs. Finch's exacting specifications. Penelope threw herself into ranch life with the same determination she had once applied to banking. She kept the books, balancing income against expenses, and identifying ways to improve efficiency. Her sharp mind for numbers proved invaluable, and within 3 months, Pine Creek Ranch was operating more profitably than ever before. But her contributions went beyond finances. Penelope had a gift for dealing with people, a warmth and directness that put strangers at ease. When Xavier was hesitant to negotiate prices with buyers, Penelope stepped in and secured deals that exceeded his expectations. When neighboring ranchers needed advice on record-keeping, she offered her expertise freely. "You have changed things around here," Xavier told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. "For the better." "We changed things together," Penelope corrected, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I could not have done any of this without you." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I was just thinking the same thing about you." The first year of marriage brought its share of challenges. A drought in late summer threatened the water supply. A sickness swept through the cattle herd requiring round-the-clock care. And there were occasional reminders of the past, like the day a traveler rode through asking questions about a woman who had been wanted for murder in Sacramento. That was a tense afternoon. The traveler was a bounty hunter following up on old leads that had never been properly closed. Xavier met him at the gate with a shotgun over his arm and a hard look in his eye. "There is no fugitive here," he said flatly. "The woman you're looking for was cleared of all charges 6 months ago. You can check with Judge Harmon in Sacramento if you do not believe me." The bounty hunter had left without causing trouble, but the incident reminded them both that the past was never truly gone. Tucker's trial had been well documented in the newspapers, and Penelope's name had been officially cleared. But not everyone read the papers, and not everyone accepted the truth. "Does it bother you?" Penelope asked that night as they lay in bed. "What people might think about me." Xavier gathered her close. "What bothers me is that anyone could still believe you were guilty after everything that came out at the trial. Tucker confessed to the murder, for God's sake. The evidence was overwhelming. Some people believe what they want to believe. Then those people can go hang," he said firmly. "I know who you are, Penelope Hayes, and I am proud to have you as my wife." The use of her married name still gave her a little thrill even after all these months. Penelope Hayes. It sounded right somehow, like it had always been meant to be. Spring arrived with wildflowers blooming across the hills and new calves being born in the pastures. Penelope discovered she was pregnant on a morning in April when Mrs. Finch noticed her turning green at the smell of frying bacon. The housekeeper's eyes widened with understanding. "Child, are you in a family way?" Penelope's hand went instinctively to her stomach. "I think I might be." Mrs. Finch let out a whoop of joy that brought Xavier running from the barn, convinced something was wrong. When he learned the truth, he stood frozen for a full minute before sweeping Penelope into his arms and spinning her around. "A baby," he kept saying, his face split by the widest grin she had ever seen. "We are having a baby." The pregnancy proceeded smoothly, thanks in large part to Mrs. Finch's careful attention and Clara's occasional advice sent by letter from Sacramento. Penelope continued to work on the ranch books well into her 7th month, only relenting when Xavier physically removed the ledgers from her hands. "You need to rest," he insisted. "The numbers will still be there after the baby comes." "I hate feeling useless," she complained. "Growing our child is not useless, Penelope. It is the most important thing you could possibly be doing. She could not argue with that. Their son arrived in January, on the coldest night of the year. The labor was long and difficult, and Xavier paced the parlor for hours, driving Mrs. Finch to distraction with his nervous energy. When the baby's cry finally echoed through the house, he burst into the bedroom without waiting for permission. Penelope lay exhausted but radiant against the pillows, a small bundle cradled in her arms. Her hair was damp with sweat, and there were dark circles under her eyes, but she had never looked more beautiful to Xavier. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Xavier approached the bed on unsteady legs. He looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket, and felt something shift inside his chest, a love so fierce and immediate that it nearly brought him to his knees. "He is perfect," he whispered. They named him William after Xavier's father. He had his mother's honey-blonde hair and his father's stubborn chin, and from his first breath he had both of them wrapped around his tiny finger. The second year of marriage brought prosperity and expansion. Pine Creek Ranch was now one of the most successful operations in the territory, and Xavier had begun talking about purchasing the adjacent property to increase their holdings. But for Penelope, the greatest riches could not be measured in dollars or acres. They were measured in quiet evenings on the porch with Xavier, in William's first steps across the parlor floor, in Mrs. Finch's laughter echoing through the kitchen. She had everything she had ever wanted, more than she had ever dared to dream. One evening, as she sat nursing William in the rocking chair Xavier had built especially for her, she reflected on how far she had come. 2 years ago, she had been lying on a dusty road, beaten and left for dead. Today, she was surrounded by love and safety and family. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, settling into the chair beside her. "How lucky I am," she replied honestly. "How strange it is that the worst moment of my life led me to the best." He reached over to stroke William's downy head. "I think about that sometimes, too. What would have happened if I had taken a different route that day, if I had not seen you on the trail?" "You would have found someone else," Penelope said. "Some other woman to give you gray hairs." Xavier shook his head. "There is no other woman for me. There never was and never will be. You are my heart, Penelope Hayes. You and this little one. Everything I do for you." She leaned over to kiss him, careful not to disturb the nursing baby. "And I for you." Outside, the sun was setting over Pine Creek Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The cattle were settling in for the night. Mrs. Finch was preparing dinner in the kitchen. And somewhere in Sacramento, Reed Tucker was serving the 27th month of his life sentence, forgotten by the world he had tried so hard to manipulate. Justice had been served. Justice had been. Love had won. And Penelope James Hayes, once left for dead on a lonely California road, had found her happily ever after. 3 years into their marriage, Penelope received news that stirred up memories she had tried to bury. Reed Tucker was dead. The letter came from the warden of San Quentin Prison, informing her as a victim of Tucker's crimes that the convicted murderer had succumbed to pneumonia in his cell. The funeral, such as it was, had already taken place. No family members had claimed the body. Penelope read the letter twice before setting it aside. She was not sure what she felt. Relief, certainly. But also something more complicated, a sadness for a life wasted on greed and cruelty. "What is it?" Xavier asked, noticing her expression. "Tucker is dead." She handed him the letter. "Pneumonia," the warden says. Xavier scanned the page, then set it down. "Good riddance." Penelope nodded slowly. "I suppose so. It just feels strange knowing he is gone. Like closing a book I had forgotten was still open." That night she dreamed of the dusty road where Xavier had found her. She was lying in the dirt again, bleeding and broken, watching the sky spin above her. But this time, instead of Tucker's face looming over her, she saw Xavier's hand reaching down. She woke with tears on her cheeks and the certainty that some chapters, no matter how painful, were necessary parts of the story. The following months brought more changes to Pine Creek Ranch. Penelope discovered she was pregnant again, and Mrs. Finch immediately went into a flurry of preparation. William, now 2 years old, was delighted by the news, though he did not entirely understand what a baby sister or brother would mean. This time, the pregnancy brought twins. Emma and Grace arrived on a stormy night in November, their cries competing with the thunder outside. Two perfect little girls with their father's dark hair and their mother's determined spirit. Xavier looked at his 3 children and wondered how he had ever thought his life was complete before Penelope arrived. "I never imagined any of this," he admitted one evening, holding Grace while Penelope nursed Emma. "A wife, children, a full house." He shook his head. "5 years ago, I was convinced I would live alone until I died." "What changed your mind?" "You," he said simply. "You changed everything." The years that followed were busy ones. William grew from a toddler to a young boy, showing his father's skill with horses and his mother's head for numbers. Emma and Grace were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief together. Pine Creek Ranch expanded twice more, becoming one of the largest operations in the region. Xavier hired additional hands to manage the workload, and Penelope found herself acting as an unofficial accountant for several neighboring ranches. "You should open a proper business," Clara suggested during one of her visits from Sacramento. "A bookkeeping service for the local ranchers. You would make a fortune." Penelope laughed. "I have enough fortune. What I want is time with my family," and time was what she got. Long days teaching William to ride, afternoons picking wildflowers with the twins, evenings on the porch with Xavier watching the sun set over the land they had built together. There were challenges, of course. A harsh winter that killed half the cattle, a fire in the barn that required months of rebuilding, William's broken arm after a fall from a horse, Emma's frightening bout with scarlet fever that kept them all awake with worry for 2 weeks. But they faced each challenge together, and each challenge made them stronger. On their 10th anniversary, Xavier surprised Penelope with a gift. It was a leather-bound journal, thick with pages covered in his careful handwriting. "What is this?" she asked, turning it over in her hands. "Our story," he replied. "I had Clara help me gather the newspaper accounts from the trial, the court records, even some of your notes." He shifted uncomfortably. "I thought our children should know someday, not just how we met, but what you overcame." Penelope opened the journal and began to read. There were articles from the Sacramento Gazette detailing Tucker's arrest and trial, court documents listing the charges against him, even the original wanted poster that had named her as a murderer. And interwoven with all of it was Xavier's own account. How he had found her on the road, how he had nursed her back to health, how they had faced Tucker together and won. Tears streamed down her face as she read. "From beaten and abandoned on a roadside to this," she murmured, gesturing to their home, their land, the distant laughter of their children playing in the yard. "It seems impossible." "Not impossible," Xavier said, taking her hand. Just unlikely, like most good things in life. That evening they sat on the porch long after the children had gone to bed. The stars were bright above them and the night air was cool and crisp. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different?" Penelope asked. "If Tucker had succeeded? If you had not found me?" "Sometimes," Xavier admitted. "But I try not to dwell on it. The past is past. What matters is now." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I used to have nightmares about that day, about lying on the road, feeling my life slip away. But I have not dreamed about it in years. You replaced the nightmares with something better." He kissed her forehead. "You did the same for me. Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions of living without really being alive. You woke me up. Then I suppose we saved each other. I suppose we did." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night. An owl calling from the barn, Wind rustling through the trees, the distant lowing of cattle settling in for sleep. From tragedy had come triumph. From violence, peace. From a chance encounter on a lonely trail, a love that had not only healed wounds, but built something enduring and beautiful. Penelope closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel, for the 1000th time since Xavier had lifted her from that dusty road, grateful. Grateful for second chances. Grateful for stubborn ranchers who refused to look the other way. Grateful for every precious moment of the life they had built. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me, for believing me, for everything." Xavier's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Thank you for letting yourself be found." 20 years after Penelope James arrived at Pine Creek Ranch, the property had transformed beyond recognition. The modest 2-story farmhouse had grown into a sprawling homestead, with additions for the growing family and improvements to make work easier. The barn had been rebuilt twice, each time larger than before, and the herd had expanded from a few dozen cattle to several hundred. William Hayes, now a young man of 21, managed the day-to-day operations of the ranch. He had inherited his father's steady temperament and his mother's sharp mind, making him an ideal successor to the family business. The twins, Emma and Grace, had both married local men and started families of their own, though they visited the ranch frequently with their children. Xavier's hair had turned gray at the temples, and Penelope's honey blonde had faded to silver. But the love between them had not diminished. If anything, it had deepened over the years, weathered by time and strengthened by shared experience. They still sat on the porch every evening watching the sunset and talking about whatever came to mind. "I was thinking about Clara today," Penelope said one spring evening. "Do you remember how she helped us escape from the cathedral?" "I remember thinking we were all going to die," Xavier admitted. And then there she was, distracting Tucker at exactly the right moment. She always did have perfect timing. Penelope smiled at the memory. "I miss her." Clara had passed away 2 years earlier, peacefully in her sleep after a long career as one of Sacramento's most respected nurses. The funeral had been well attended, and Penelope had given a eulogy that had not a dry eye in the church. She would have liked seeing this, Penelope continued, gesturing at the ranch spread out before them. "Everything we built, she always said I deserved good things. You did deserve them," Xavier said firmly. "You still do." Penelope took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long familiarity. "We both do." The years had brought their share of losses. Mrs. Finch had retired and eventually passed away, leaving a hole in their household that never quite filled. Judge Harmon had died of old age, remembered as one of the most honorable men in California history. Even James Bennett, the newspaperman who had helped expose Tucker's crimes, had succumbed to a heart attack the previous summer. But for every loss, there had been gains. Grandchildren who shrieked with joy when they visited. Friendships that had deepened over decades. A community that respected and relied on the Hayes family. "No regrets?" Penelope asked, as she often did. "Not one," Xavier replied, as he always did. "I would live this life again 1,000 times. Even the hard parts? Being shot at in a cathedral? Nearly losing the ranch in the drought of 1889? Even those." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Every hard part led us somewhere worth going." Penelope looked out at the land they had cultivated together, at the life they had built from nothing. From tragedy to triumph, from desperation to peace, from a chance encounter on a dusty road to 50 years of love and partnership. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. "Tell me again," she said softly, "the story of how we met." Xavier smiled, settling back in his chair. "It was August of 1873. Hot as blazes, I remember. I was riding back from town when I saw something on the road ahead. At first I thought it was discarded clothing, or maybe an animal. And then I got closer. And I saw it was a woman. Most beautiful woman I had ever seen, even covered in dirt and blood. I knew right then that my life was about to change. Penelope closed her eyes, letting his voice wash over her like warm water. She had heard this story 100 times, but it never got old. It was their story, the foundation of everything they had become. She listened as Xavier described lifting her onto his horse, riding through the hills to Pine Creek Ranch, watching over her as she healed. She listened as he recounted their journey to Sacramento, the confrontation with Tucker, the triumph of justice. And when he reached the end, the part where they kissed for the first time on the courthouse steps, she opened her eyes and found him watching her with the same love he had shown her for decades. "Best decision I ever made," he said, "stopping on that road." "Best thing that ever happened to me," she replied. "Being found." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon. Two people who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, their love a testament to the power of courage, trust, and second chances. In the soft gathering darkness of an August evening, 53 years after Xavier Hayes found a beaten woman on a dusty California road, Penelope sat in her usual chair on the porch of Pine Creek Ranch. She was alone now. Xavier had passed peacefully in his sleep 3 months earlier, his hand still clasped in hers when the morning light revealed he was gone. The grief had been overwhelming at first, a wave that threatened to drown her, but gradually it had transformed into something gentler, a bittersweet ache that reminded her of how much she had been loved. The children had wanted her to move in with one of them. William had offered her a room in the main house, which he now ran with his own wife and children. Emma and Grace had both invited her to live in town where she would have company and care. But Penelope had refused. This was her home, the place where she and Xavier had built their life together. She was not ready to leave it. "Besides," she told them, "I am not alone here. Your father is everywhere I look." And it was true. She saw him in the barn he had built with his own hands, in the fields where they had worked side by side, in the chair beside hers, empty now but still holding the impression of his presence. The leather-bound journal he had given her on their 10th anniversary sat in her lap. She had been reading it again, as she often did since his passing, reliving their story through his words. From tragedy had come triumph. That was what Xavier had written on the final page. From violence, peace. From a chance encounter on a lonely trail, a love that endured. Penelope closed the journal and looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the evening sky. Somewhere out there, she believed Xavier was watching, waiting for her, as he had always waited. She was 92 years old. Her hair was white, her body frail, her eyesight failing. But her mind was sharp, and her heart was full of gratitude for the life she had been given. A life she had almost lost on a dusty road in 1873. She thought about the young woman she had been back then, frightened, alone, left for dead by men who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to their greed. That woman had been certain she was going to die. But she had not died. She had survived, and not just survived, she had thrived, loved, built a family and a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. That was the real victory, she realized. Not defeating Tucker or clearing her name or winning the settlement. The real victory was every single day she had lived fully, loved deeply, and refused to let tragedy define her. A gentle breeze stirred the evening air, carrying the scent of wildflowers and hay. Penelope closed her eyes and let it wash over her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me, for saving me, for giving me everything." She did not know if Xavier could hear her, but she liked to think he could. She liked to think he was smiling somewhere, proud of the woman she had become, the woman he had helped her become. William found her the next morning, still sitting in her chair, her face peaceful and her hand resting on the journal. She had passed some time in the night, quietly and without pain. When they buried her beside Xavier on the hill overlooking the ranch, the whole community came to pay their respects. The preacher spoke of love and faith and the promise of reunion. The children and grandchildren wept and remembered. But the truth of Penelope Hayes's life could not be captured in a eulogy. It was written in the land she had helped cultivate, in the family she had raised, in the countless lives she had touched over more than half a century on the California frontier. She had been beaten down, but not broken, accused, but not defeated, left for dead, but determined to live. And in the end, she had not just survived, she had triumphed. That is the lesson of this story, the truth worth remembering. No matter how dark things get, no matter how hopeless they seem, there is always a road forward. There is always someone willing to help if you are brave enough to accept their hand. Penelope James found her second chance on a lonely road in 1873. She seized it with both hands and never let go. May we all be so courageous. May we all find our Xavier. May we all, when our time comes, be able to look back on our lives and say, I was beaten down, but I got back up. I was left for dead, but I chose to live. And what a life it was. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.